All right, so we are now beginning the blue game in hand win rate ordered set review. I'm changing gears here from when I did white yesterday, and I'm not going to sort by commonality. I'm just going to do full set within, or well, every blue card by game in hand win rate, and then I'll talk about where commonality matters or something like that. But I feel like it's easiest, especially for like commons and uncommons, to just compare them together, right? So that's what we're gonna do. So top is Chroma Host Seed Shark. This thing is a legitimate insane bomb. This card, I believe, is potentially making some waves in older format in Constructed due to its ability to make large creatures without spending that much mana because of cards where you don't need to spend their full converted mana cost to cast them. And since the Convoke mechanic exists in this limited format, you get to do some of that with Chroma Host Seed Shark. So you get to, sometimes you can, as an opponent just did to me earlier today, you can play Chrome Host Seed Shark and immediately convoke a 4-mana spell and make a 4/4 token, which means that it's even better than it might read just normally, where you think, oh, you spend X mana and you get an XX incubator token. Also, I mean, this is limited. A 4-mana 2/4 flyer, a 3-mana 2/4 flyer is just a good rate by itself. And the kind of value this is giving you is perfect. It doesn't matter that much that you need to spend some mana to make the creatures alive, and just making a bunch of creatures is going to be relevant in basically every limited game. So no real surprise to see this up here. Card's incredible. This is one of those, something really, really weird has to happen for you to not take this out of a pack type bombs. And that includes, like, you should seriously consider splashing it if you open it pack 3 when you're in a different deck. There are times when you won't do that if you're like a 2-color aggro deck and there's a reasonable card for you or something, but this is a very splashable card also. Up next, we have Zephyr Singer. 4-mana Convoke, Flying Vigilance, 3/4. When it enters the battlefield, put a flying counter on each creature you control that convoked it. This is another one where, if just 4-mana, 3/4 Flying Vigilance would be a fine card. Like, basically, you could remove any of this card's many abilities, and it would still be a good card in limited. If it itself didn't have Flying and Vigilance, but it had Convoke and gave Flying and Vigilance to things that Convoked it would be good. I mean, if it was just a 4-mana 3/4 Convoke creature, it wouldn't be horrible. And in practice, this card is, a lot better than it would be without any of its text. Getting to take a turn off of attacking to get many flying creatures is really, really good. I've had success with this in Standard, and so it's, pretty hard for it not to be an incredible limited card given that, especially since flying is generally more important in limited. Taking a turn off of attacking is generally less important. Just turning any random, 2/2 or 3/3 into a creature with flying is huge. So yeah, another great bomb. Slightly less splashable, obviously, since it's double blue, but more splashable than it looks because you don't actually need 2 lands that tap for blue if you have a blue creature. And so, yeah. There's a side question about how important is improvement when drawn. The answer is it's unimportant to exceedingly misleading if you try to use it too much without deeply understanding it. This is not the right time to go into exactly why or how it works, but for the purpose of this review, I'm not going to be paying attention to improvement when drawn, and I'll just say, if you're not completely sure you understand all the implications around it, proceed with caution if you're referencing it, because it can be really misleading. Up next, we have a common. There are 2 rares and then a common in the most successful, highest win rate blue cards. This is well before we get to a mythic. So Preening Champion, solidly a mythic common. This is a card that, if you don't have a true bomb rare, it's reasonable to take Preening Champion over basically any uncommon. I'm not saying that you necessarily always should. Of course, there are some things going on here in terms of it's taken later than the cards around it. So as far as does Preening Champion actually improve your deck more than Faerie Mastermind? There's room for debate. The improvement when drawn, again, I'm not going to talk about it a lot, but the improvement when drawn is similar, but in Preening Champion's favor. Just a small suggestion that it's better in the heads up. I think Preening Champion is, for the record, better in most blue decks than Faerie Mastermind. But it is taken later, and that means that it cost whoever took it less to do that. The other big thing that's going on in terms of inflating Preening Champion's win rate is people who are in the know are a lot more likely to take Preening Champion much higher and therefore have it a lot more often. Like the fact that it's, basically a bomb power level card, but goes 4th pick or whatever instead of, 2nd pick, indicates that the people who want it have it a lot. And the thing about the people who want it having a lot is if it's really good, the people who know about it likely have more than one of them. And so, that means that kind of the rest of their deck is better because of that. Both, they're just more likely to be in the know in general, and the Preening Champions help each other out. So, the fact that you can get a large number of them and it's good to draw multiples means that it can look very, very slightly inflated. But again, even if you, knock off a % or whatever, it's still better than all the other blue cards. This card is very good in this format for a lot of reasons. Obviously, it is great for Convoke. That's kind of the most exceptional part about it. But it's also a knight, so it has some synergies there, and it also is a flying creature that's very efficient at threatening battles and also being able to protect your battles while attacking by having the 1/1 to jump block or whatever. This is on the order of best common all time. You should be paying a lot of attention to it anytime you see it in packs. If you are seeing Preening Champion after, pick 1 or 2, it's a significant sign that blue is open, and when blue is open, it's very good to draft blue. Blue is the strongest color in the set. You should know about this one. Faerie Mastermind, 2/1 flash flying. Whenever an opponent draws their 2nd card each turn, you draw a card. 3 and a blue, each player draws a card. 2/1 for 2. 2/1 flash flyer for 2 is basically fine by itself. Obviously, Brothers War had the same thing, but also with extra text at uncommon. So apparently we can expect more than just a 2/1 flash flyer for 2 these days, without even needing to be a rare. But it's not that uncommon for your opponent to draw a card naturally. It's not super common, but there's Eyes of Jin-Gitaxias, and I guess people don't play Scroll Shift a lot, and a lot of the cantrips don't actually draw a card. They Overgrown Pest, for example, is kind of like a cantrip creature, but it doesn't actually draw a card, so it doesn't trigger Faerie Mastermind, but Invasion of Amonkhet does. I would expect in general to not draw fewer than one card on average passively from its trigger, but the way that its activated ability works is if you use its ability to make each player draw a card on your opponent's turn, then they draw one card and you draw two cards. So this ends up functioning very similar to like the 1/1 pirate that you can spend 4 mana to draw a card. 4 mana to draw two cards and your opponent draws one card is probably very slightly worse than just 4 mana to draw a card, but it's still pretty comparable. And then you also just get a good body, and the good body, of course, has the extra context of threatening battle as well. Artistic Refusal. This is a card that I think some people early in the format, maybe even still, are kind of split on. 6 is a lot of mana for a counterspell, but of course Convoke means that it doesn't really cost you 6 mana. The effect of this card is really, really good. Countering a spell, like Dismiss, counter a spell, and draw a card is really, it pulls you ahead a lot because, you're up a card and you're like usually not really down tempo. Sometimes you're up tempo. Sometimes the card that your opponent cast was like going to be a really big deal, and then it doesn't happen, and then you do a thing that's appreciably better than draw a card. This is an important card just to know about in the format. You really want to pay attention to when your blue opponents suspiciously have 6 creatures plus lands untapped, and try not to run your best spells into it. There is a pretty good chance if your opponent held an extra creature back to be at 6 that this is the card they have. There's not another 6 mana instant speed Convoke card except to some extent Transcendent Message. So if you are and Shadow the Source if they're in red. But there is a lot of disaster mitigation that can be done by paying attention to when your opponent is probably representing this. I've had some discussions with other good players about which kinds of decks Artistic Refusal goes in. I like Artistic Refusal in blue decks. Other people might only like it in aggressive or defensive blue decks, since the defensive blue deck, in a defensive blue deck, it's much easier to hold this up, especially multiple turns in a row. And you can kind of be a little bit more selective with it, and you're more likely to be trying to play a long game where you're going to have time to use this. In an aggressive deck, it might seem like, well, I don't want to not attack to have mana for this, and I don't want to hold up my thing. But on the other hand, if you're aggressive, you're more likely to, potentially more likely to have a bunch of cheap creatures in play. But also, if you're in a spot where you're actually ahead and you're pushing damage, then you can just hold this up and stop your opponent from stabilizing, and you get kind of a time walk effect in your aggro deck. So I'm a big fan. I think that the one spot where I don't necessarily love it is specifically when you're the aggressive tap out Convoke deck where you basically I like it if you're Knights aggro. I don't like it if you're red blue tokens Convoke, because then the time walk your opponent to get an extra attack thing doesn't really happen because your little Convoke creatures can't attack. All they can do is Convoke. And you might need to be convoking something that's going to change the direction of the game rather than maintain the direction of the game, meaning convoking a big creature or something instead of convoking a counterspell. That said, pretty hard to argue that Artistic Refusal is a bad card in your blue-red token convoke deck. That's not a case I would try to make, even if I'm arguing that like sometimes you might prefer a different convoke card, arguably. And honestly, most of the time that I'm drafting, I would rather change my deck to be a deck that would prefer Artistic Refusal than like take a different card instead. So to my taste and from my experience, I think Artistic Refusal is good in blue decks. Decks that can cast it, I think, want it. Up next, very, very, very similar power level, different blue uncommon, Captive Weird. Captive Weird is just everything blue wants. It's a 1-mana creature for Convoke. 1/3 defender, blocks reasonably. 3 mana to turn into a 3/3 that can attack immediately, and then also basically draws you a card. This thing's just fantastic. Every blue deck wants as many of them as they can get. Take it very highly, of course. There's no drawback here. It's just all good. Forest Dispersal. This is a messed up card. Because a decent portion of the large creatures in this format are tokens, Phyrexian Incubator tokens specifically, this just gets to kill a creature a reasonable portion of the time, which, as a 3-mana instant, kill a creature and surveil too is very good. Sometimes it's only 1 mana. The times when it's only 1 mana are often the times when you most need it to be only 1 mana. When you're getting attacked and you're trying to change the momentum of the game and turn things around, this lets you double spell and buy yourself a lot of time. When this doesn't get to bounce a token and it has to bounce a creature instead, it's still a really, really good effect in this format in particular, because there are so many mana sinks. When you bounce a creature to your opponent's hand and force them to recommit the mana to replay the creature, that's often going to be at the cost of them doing something else productive with that mana. A large portion of the time, this is easily worth the full card, just from the tempo of tying up the mana. And that's before you get to like the fact that it surveils too, the fact that it can blow out a combat trick. Yeah. Once you factor all of that in, this you realize this is just a fantastic removal spell. Blue, basically any blue deck, regardless of your positioning or whatever, wants to play as many of them as it can get. There's not really like a limit to the number of these I would put in a deck, and not really, it doesn't super matter what kind of deck you are. If you're blue, you want it. Rona, Herald of Invasion. We don't see a lot of looters these days that don't cost mana to activate. When they make them at common, they generally cost mana, and that generally makes them bad. Spending mana and tapping a creature to improve the quality of your hand is typically not worth it in Modern Limited. However, if you don't have to spend mana to do that, then it's still very good. Anytime you have any amount of time, this will just meaningfully increase the quality of your draws relative to your opponents. Also, unlike a card like Merfolk Looter, a 2-mana 1/1 that can tap to draw a card and discard a card, this is a 1/3, so it can actually block reasonably while looting. And also, there are a decent number of legends in this set, like at least one in every pack, more than one in every pack on average, since as with Rona, there are some that are not in the Multiverse Legends slot, plus one Multiverse Legends slot in every pack. So untapping it to get an extra loot certainly comes up. Finally, this transforms into a 5/5 trample monster with more good text. So again, this is just a card that's just great in every direction. This is just a good rare. It's not, certified bomb Chrome Host Seed Shark level. It's, basically, more or less exactly as good as the best uncommons type level. We're getting to the point where, I think all of these top uncommons are pretty competitive with Preening Champion. Probably you're supposed to take Preening Champion over them, but like if it's pack, 2 or 3 and you already have a lot of 3-drops, I think it's reasonable to take any of the cards that don't necessarily cost 3 mana over Preening Champion. And Rona, I think that's also true of. Like pack 1, pick 1. You're probably supposed to take Preening Champion, but I can't guarantee that I wouldn't take Rona. It's sweet to get to play with a rare, and it's a very good one. Skyclave Aerialist has almost the same win rate as Rona, but it's taken, about 2 picks later. I think that Rona is appreciably better than Skyclave Aerialist. I think that it's a lot harder to defend taking Skyclave Aerialist over Preening Champion than it is taking Rona over Preening Champion. That said, Skyclave Aerialist is really good. It's another 2/1 flyer for 2, which is, of course, a great baseline. And then for 4 mana, you get to slightly better than draw a card and make it a 2/4, at which point it blocks pretty well, in addition to being a good evasive attacker. Another just straightforward good card, good rate on the front side, and then has a good transform ability. Invasion of Segovia. I'm a little surprised to see Invasion of Segovia this low, to be honest. I've been really impressed with this card. 3 mana for 3 objects is hard to go wrong. I think kind of the card that taught the world about that, I would credit Hordling Outburst, 1 red to make 3 1/1 goblin tokens. Here, for an easier cost, you get to give your 2 tokens trample, and instead of a 3rd token, you get a battle. That's only 4 loyalty to defeat, and when it transforms, you get a really incredible creature. Cadus, Sea Tyrant of Segovia, is a 3/3. It gives your non-creature spells convoke, and at the beginning of your end step, you get to untap up to 4 target creatures. This generates an enormous amount of mana if your deck has a reasonable number of non-creature spells, especially instants. And of course, just your cards that naturally have Convoke, this plays very well with, since you get 2 bodies up front. You're playing blue, so it's pretty easy to have some flyers. A couple attacks from, any of Preening Champion or Skyclave Aerialist or most any other flyer is going to transform this, and since mana is so valuable in this set, the amount of mana that this generates has easily turned into wins for me. It's not hard for me to understand how Preening Champion is better. Preening Champion is much better at flipping your other battles, whereas you kind of have to enable this somehow, and Preening Champion is the best way to enable it. But I really, really like what this card's doing, and certainly would take it over Ifara's Dispersal, for example. And again, Ifara's Dispersal has a better game in hand win rate, but Ifara's Dispersal is also taken 6.2, after 6th pick on average, whereas Segovia is taken a little after 2nd pick on average, and that kind of thing matters a little bit in terms of, creating some weird data. Incidentally, Artistic Refusal going 6th on average. People are probably sleeping on this one. I mentioned that there was some controversy in terms of just people having different assessments about it early. I would say at this point we have, enough data that people should know. Also, Captive Weird going after 4th on average is criminal while we're at it. These blue uncommons are super premium uncommons. You should, not be taking most other uncommons in the set. You can take bomb rares over them, of course. You should be taking these over every common that's not Preening Champion, and like basically every uncommon. Eyes of Jin-Gitaxias. This is, in my opinion, a big drop from the cards we've talked about so far. I think for me, I see like every card above this as like fantastic, and Eyes as a good card in my deck, but not something that's like making my deck way better. Could be wrong about that. Its win percentage is very, very comparable to Invasion of Segovia, though, obviously there's the confounding factor of the rarity and stuff, and we can see that Invasion of Segovia has a much higher improvement when drawn than Eyes. I like Eyes. I think it's a good card, but it is appreciably slow. Spending 3 mana to not impact the board immediately does matter. However, this format is not super aggressive. The games aren't super short, so you often don't get punished too badly for doing it. Not too much more to say about that one. Up next, we have Assimilate Essence. Cables on average wins more than probably a vast majority of non-blue commons. I was leaving this in my sideboard early. Certainly an underrated card in general. You can see game in hand number compared to the other commons. Game in hand number tells you how often people are playing it. Most of these aren't common, but Preening Champion has been played almost 88,000 times, or has been drawn almost 88,000 times, whereas Assimilate Essence under half that. So we can assume, under half of Assimilate Essences find their way into decks. Good chance that that's wrong, given its stats. Although, of course, this means that people are choosing spots where your deck is good for the card to play the card, which does increase its win rate somewhat, compared to if everyone saw these stats and then put it in every blue deck, your stats would presumably go down because some of those blue decks wouldn't want it. On the other hand, one could argue the fact that it's not played that much maybe means people are only playing it when their deck is a little shorter on cards, and so it's being played in weaker decks, and that arguably is pulling its win rate down. We see some evidence from that in that it has a lower game played win rate than some of the cards around it. So if you want to say maybe this is being seen as a 23rd card, and therefore not going in the best decks, but it's still winning this much when it's drawn, that might suggest that it's even better than that. That if people played it in their good decks, it might have a win rate, like maybe it would be better than Eyes of Jin-Gitaxias. There are plenty of expensive spells, plenty of bombs that this counters and can really save you. Countering battles is nice, since a lot of the battles are bombs. Counter unless controller pays 4. 4 is a lot. It takes a lot longer for this card to go dead than like a thing that counters unless they pay 2, for example. This card is likely better in this set than like Essence Scatter would be. Like the exchange of get to counter battles, but don't counter if your opponent has a ton of mana. That's probably positive, and Essence Scatter is generally like a premium common in sets that it's in. I think that for some of us, I think even for me, it kind of helps to just like try to fully contextualize this card. Think of it as Essence Scatter instead of thinking of it as one of those soft counters that exists, and might be easier to see like how good this is and how to play it. Saiba Cryptomancer. This is the 2-mana flash 1/2 backup 1 hexproof. This is a card that I slept on until I saw its early stats. If you think of this as a creature, it's not very good. But if you think of this, if instead you compare this to a protection spell, then this is not all that different from the white protection spell that gives +1/+1 in protection from a color, or gives a +1/+1 counter in protection from a color. This gives +1/+1 and hexproof, which is very slightly worse than protection from a color. But in exchange, you get an extra body also. So you get like a body that can chump block and tap for mana to convoke, and also a counter, and you win your combat or stop their removal spell or whatever. It's not an ideal 2-drop for a convoke deck because it doesn't really slot smoothly into your curve. You don't know when you're going to want to cast this, but it does end up helping you out at some point. Chat points out also the fact that this 0/1 has hexproof. You wouldn't think that really matters most of the time, but the fact that you can leave it back to chump block and your opponent can't just like use a removal spell to hit you with their big creature, having that reliable chump can actually matter. Also, this hexproof body that just ends up hanging out is more valuable than you might first think once you start combining it with other backup cards or Aerial Wingspan that convoke +2/+2 and flying. Getting to have just this random hexproof body that didn't cost you anything that keeps hexproof, like it gives hexproof for 1 turn and then it just keeps hexproof after that. Getting to have that just around in a format where you can then turn it into something is potentially pretty legit. Suggested this card plays really well with Wrath. Definitely agree with that. Good way to get an extra body while protecting Wrath. Of course, there is the complicating factor that, compared to another protection spell, it is not itself a spell that triggers Wrath. But I think on balance, it's certainly very good there since the extra creature, getting a way to use that's so good. Zurich Strobe Knight. I am honestly quite surprised by how low the game and hand win rate is on this card. I have been really impressed. It has been pretty easy for me to tap this thing to make a knight. This is the 3-mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance Human Knight with tap, create a 2/2 white and blue knight creature token with Vigilance. You can only do this if you've cast 2 or more spells this turn. 3-mana 2/2 Flying Vigilance is not enough to make a 3-mana 2/2 flyer good. However, if you make 1 creature with this, then it is a lot better than Preening Champion. As now you have a 2/2 with Vigilance and another 2/2 without flying, or you have a 2/2 Flying Vigilance and a 2/2 non-flying Vigilance. For the same mana that you could have spent on Preening Champion to have a 2/2 and a 1/1 with no Vigilance anywhere. Also, the 2/2 Flying Vigilance threatens to continue to make more 2/2s. So the stats suggest that this is making considerably fewer than one 2/2 per game, and or the delay on getting that 2/2 matters a lot compared to Champion giving you the 1/1 right away. Incidentally, even if you aren't triggering this, the Vigilance does help significantly with being able to use it to convoke things. I've had better experiences than this personally. I don't know if people are not drafting their decks to be as good at triggering this as I am. I don't know if people are sometimes not thinking about spots where they should not play their Captive Weird on turn 1 because they have a Strobe Knight in their hand, and then on turn 3 they can or on turn 4 rather, they can play a Preening Champion and a Captive Weird and tap their Strobe Knight. I think that you do want to consider not playing 1-drops on turn 1 when you have this. Yeah, I don't know. I certainly am not at a point where I could see myself taking Cryptomancer, Assimilate Essence, or Eyes of Jitaxias over Strobe Knight, even while, looking directly at this data. I'm taking the Strobe Knight. I'm a believer. Obviously, I can point to data that supports that in terms of the average taken at on the 3 cards that win more than the Strobe Knight, being 5 picks-ish later than the Strobe Knight, suggests that looking just at the game and hand win rate might not tell the whole story. So you can also make the improvement when drawn argument and suggest that all of these cards are better to draw than the Strobe Knight. So, yeah. Some reasonable people can disagree, some debate to be had, some issues with the fact that the Strobe Knight costs the same amount of mana as Preening Champion and Eyes of Jitaxias, and, even the dispersal used practically. Like, blue is not short on good 3-drops, and that's, a strike against each of them. But, I don't know. Strobe Knight does it for me. Up next, we have Sea Double. This is another card that I am very high on. And full disclosure, I'm going to draft this more highly than its game and hand win rate suggests I might. It's suggested that Strobe Knight might have different stats and different color pairs. I could certainly see that. It does play way better with white, where the fact that it's a knight matters, and the fact that white has cheap convoke cards to make it easier to double spell matters. I'm not going to do a deep dive on that right now, but there are certainly decks where this doesn't perform that well because you're bad at double spell. Anyway, Sea Double. 2 blue, this spell can't be copied. Choose one. If an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, you may choose both. Copy target spell. You can choose new targets for the copy, or create a token that's a copy of target creature. So, I said that I'm taking this higher than its game and hand win rate suggests. That's because I believe that this card can be drafted around in a meaningful way, and I also believe that this is an extremely skill testing card to play with. This is an instant speed clone or copy a spell. That means you have a ton of options about how to use it. The question about when you should try to copy a creature versus when you should save it, and then also the fact that it gets better when an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard, asks you to figure out, okay, am I supposed to, hold this to try to set up both modes or not? There's just a lot of room for someone to get less than all potential available value out of Sea Double. This is one where I suspect that if I look at the... I'm actually going to, just to make the point, I haven't checked this before, but I suspect that if we go to win rates for top users, that Sea Double is going to improve. And yeah, it's moved up. There are far fewer cards above the Sea Double when sorted this way. The fact that it's at a 64% game in hand win rate, that really doesn't tell us how much it moves, because we need to be controlling for what it's done relative to the average. But, it has now passed these cards that we looked at before: Assimilate Essence, Rona, Cryptomancer, Skyclave Aerialist, Eyes of Jitaxias. The Sea Double is not the easiest card to play or get the most value out of or draft around. So the more you trust yourself to take advantage of everything Sea Double offers, the higher you should pick it. As for taking advantage of Sea Double, I would offer the advice that you should, if you start a draft with C double, or if you have C double at any point in the draft, you should try to oh, I'm now looking at middle instead of all users. Sorry, let me fix that. You should try to find a scab, the Halo charged scab, much weaker card. We'll get to it later. But when it enters the battlefield, each player mills 2 cards. Then you may put an instant sorcery or battle card from your graveyard on the top of your library. I recommend choosing to put the card C double on top of your library when your scab resolves. And then when you draw your C double, I recommend targeting the scab. I recommend continuing to do those things until your opponent has 8 cards in their graveyard. Then I recommend drawing the C double and passing. And then in the end of your opponent, and then if your opponent has any sorceries they would like to play, or cards that can be played at sorcery speed, I recommend casting the C double to copy that spell and also copy your scab. Once you establish this loop, whenever your opponent plays a sorcery, you will get a copy of it, and you will also get a 4/4, and you will continue doing this every turn. Every time you do this, your opponent and you will mill 2 cards, but you'll put a card back on top of your deck, and therefore your opponent will get milled out faster than you. Is that always true? What if you're drawing more cards than your opponent? Well, great news. You can always choose to copy the you can always choose to copy the scab on an empty library to mill nothing, and then put the C double on top, and then draw the C double. And in this way, you will never deck yourself unless your opponent has a counterspell or removal spell. Question about why only sorcery? It can copy any spell. Yes, I agree. What I meant was, if your opponent has a sorcery speed spell, they can't play around your C double. Like, you get to have the mana up on their turn, and then in their end step, you have to decide if you want to just not do anything, or if you want to copy your scab in their end step. And if you decide to copy the scab in their end step, then you don't get to copy their thing, and then they could maybe play it. You could alternatively just not cast anything, but the point is, with an instant, there's some amount of play here. With a sorcery, they can't get around it. You're going to get to copy their thing and your scab. Unless they have a removal spell or whatever, but they didn't, presumably, before, because you got to this point in the loop. So anyway, yeah. Look for scab, because when you have both of them in your deck, if the game goes long, you will eventually assemble it most of the time, and it will win games that you're not already way behind or losing to flyers or whatever. That's what I have to say about C double. Up next, Inga Runai's. 4-mana 3/3. When it enters the battlefield, scry 3. When it dies, draw 3 cards if 3 or more creatures died this turn. There are several returning cards from Kaldheim in this set that don't play, that are not as good in this set as they were in Kaldheim. It's interesting that Inga seems significantly better in this set than Kaldheim. It's always neat to see when it's not just like, oh, this set's stronger than Kaldheim's, the Kaldheim cards aren't as good. This set is different, so different cards are good. Really, really just a sweet thing to observe in terms of just like, oh, it's cool that Magic works that way. As to why this is better in this set than it was in Kaldheim, for one thing, blue is a strong color instead of a weak color. Also, I think that there are just wider boards thanks to the incubate tokens, which makes it more likely that a bunch of things are going to die at once. The games, I think, are a little bit... I think you have a little bit more time to just kind of like play a 3/3 and scry and be happy about the scry value. I don't know that I have the perfect explanation, but if you played a good amount of Kaldheim and you weren't really into this card, you might be underrating it now. It's not amazing, but it is card you generally want to put in your deck. Up next, Temporal Cleansing. This this is a card that has a higher win rate than Meeting of the Minds, though I personally prefer Meeting of the Minds. I think that Temporal Cleansing, you pay attention to the first part of the name. I think it works best in the tempo decks. This is a soft removal spell that is sorcery speed and lets you, tap creatures. Like, this card at sorcery speed without Convoke is not very good. 4 mana to put a creature second from the top it's not horrible. If it were just on top instead of second from the top, it would be horrible. Getting rid of their creature for more than one turn makes it reasonable. It also gives you enough time that if you follow this up with any of the both player mills that top some cards, you turn this into a real removal spell. But to really be happy with this card, I feel like you need to be planning to Convoke it. These kinds of cards are generally best if you're aggressive. There's this weird situation here where you're giving up some damage, but you're presumably like double spelling and pulling further ahead while giving up some damage and pushing some damage by removing their blocker. Basically, I think this card is best if you are either aggressive or have the both players mill stuff going on. And then in some like control decks where you have a lot of card advantage and you're just looking for like 1-for-1 card exchange type cards. And it is dispreferred the more you are an instant speed deck, which I'm generally trying to do with blue more than the average blue deck is. Tetsuko Umezawa, Fugitive. This, as Chad has mentioned, is another reprint that is far better than it was the first time. There are a lot more good ways to end up with 1-power creatures in blue decks that you care about attacking with. You care more about attacking with them due to the existence of battles. Tetsuko threatens battles extremely well. It also just like the way this format works, there are more board stalls, and this kind of like gives you a path to end a game in a way that your opponent can't interact with more often. They're often wider, so it's presenting more damage a turn. The original Dominaria Tetsuko just didn't end up doing a lot of that. Often the decks that like had 1-power creatures were maybe trying to pump them up in other ways, which doesn't necessarily work with Tetsuko. Also, I would note that it's easy to shortcut Tetsuko, to like not read it carefully and think of it as getting 1-power creatures through. It does not only get 1-power creatures through. It also works on any creature with 1 toughness. It's particularly good with creatures that have 1 toughness and a lot of power. That means that it plays exceptionally well with specifically Wary Thespian and the Dreadship. Wary Thespian in green, that's the 3/1 that surveils when it enters, and Wary Thespian is the and then the Dreadship, the 4/1 haste vehicle that incubates 2 when it enters. So look out for just general anything with a higher power and 1 toughness that'll combine really well with this, and prioritize it pretty highly if you have battles. Also, it's better, of course, just because any kind of random durable / playable 2-drop. Also the 3/1 knight that gets first strike when you play a knight in white. Basically the same situation as the Thespian, except that knight kind of gives itself pseudo evasion by getting first strike when you play a knight, but certainly another good combo. Also When playing against Tetsuko, look for stuff like using Cryptomancer to put a counter on your opponent's creature to make it blockable. Also, when using Tetsuko on your own attacks, be careful about attacking into untapped mana in a spot where your opponent could remove Tetsuko and then kill all of your other attackers. There are certainly some risks with Tetsuko, but the card overall is very strong. Great card for any Convoke deck, since it makes your random weird tokens relevant threats in addition to contributing to your Convoke. Up next, below Tetsuko Umezawa, we have Jin-Gitaxias, the blue Praetor, mythic, 3 blue 5/5 ward 2. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card. You can largely stop reading at this point. There are a lot more words. For the most part, they don't matter very much. And in fact, I'm going to take the principled stance that they matter so little that I'm going to save my voice and not read all that. There will be games where it does come up that you can transform this. They will certainly be the exception. However, 5 mana, 5/5 ward 2 is a bad but not embarrassing card. But adding whenever you cast a non-creature spell with mana value 3 or greater, draw a card is where this gets interesting. I think Jin-Gitaxias is definitely worse than the premium commons and uncommons, but can, be taken early and meaningfully drafted around. It plays super well with cards like Temporal Cleansing and Meeting of the Minds that cost less than 3 mana to trigger it. And if you can, actually get this thing drawing a bunch of cards, then, it's worth the investment. This is in no way a typical Praetor level bomb, but it is a playable card. It's, at 5 mana 5/5, that could go either way. Jin-Gitaxias, in its various printings historically, has not had a ton of limited utility. But this one is solid, but not exceptional. Up next, Brawl, Chief of Compliance. This is a reprint on the Multiverse Legends sheet, probably pretty well known. 1 in a blue, 1/3. Instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast. Whenever for you. Whenever a spell or ability you control counters a spell, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. The discount matters more than the counterspell trigger. This is another good card for the Convoke decks. Making a Meeting of the Minds cost effect essentially 2 mana less, 1 from its ability and 1 from it convoking, is pretty big. I think that in the average deck, Brawl is going to help less than Tetsuko, but its ceiling is similarly high, although different. Look for just playing this in a deck with a lot of instants and sorceries. Plays well with stuff like Eyes of Jitaxias. Obviously, you get meaningful extra value if you do counter spells, and you do want to prioritize like Assimilate Essence to go with Brawl, but this is one that can easily be very good or very bad, just as a function of the number of instants and sorceries you have. Up next, Omen Hawker. This is a very cool card. This is one where its aggregate win rate should not matter very much to you. If you can productively tap this thing for mana every turn, such that you essentially have a Soul Ring, this is a very, very good card. If you can tap it for mana like 0 to 2 times a game, then it's nowhere near as strong. This card has a pretty neat combo with Urn of Godfire, where you turn this thing into a bird of paradise, essentially. You get to make 2 mana, put that through the urn to get a mana of any color. That makes it really easy to spend the mana from this thing every turn, which makes it pretty good. It's also, the primary thing that you're doing with this is transforming things. Those things could be Phyrexian tokens, or they could be the sleeper cards, the non-Phyrexians that you can spend mana to transform into Phyrexians. I don't have a number off the top of my head for the number of different things that can lead to you wanting to transform something that makes you want to play this, but there presumably is some number. If you are, generally in the Phyrexian space, this guy is probably going to be good for you. If you have a mix of incubator tokens and transform guys. And then, look for weird blue-green multicolor decks that want to play 1 or 2 urns with this guy. It'd be really, really sweet to see a deck with 2 or 3 of these and 2 or 3 urns and Emery, and you just go off. But I don't think that's really the usual case. Meeting the Minds, I love it. This is 4 mana instant, convoke, draw 2 cards. Blue can be drafted as a tempo deck or a more controlling deck. This is much less good in the aggressive blue decks, like your Blue-White Knights decks, than it is in your slower, more instant speed heavy blue decks. I suspect that some amount of this is it being played in decks that don't make the most of it. I've had very good experiences with this in decks that use it well, but you do need to draft a very specific deck to use it really well. How to do that is pretty obvious. Just be on lookout for cheap creatures and don't try to attack with them. That's may sound like weird advice to some people, but happens to be precisely the center of my wheelhouse. I love having a lot of cheap creatures and not attacking with them. That's why Wrath is one of my favorite cards. But if that doesn't sound like the kind of thing you get up to, then this card might not be great for you. Part of, the trade-off with having a card where its game and hand win rate's not that exciting, but I think it's way better than that for me. For every me there is who's getting higher than this game and hand win rate on average, there are other people who are getting lower than this on average when they put it in a deck that doesn't use it to the best of its ability. Next, Transcendent Message with almost the same win rate as Meeting the Minds, and very, very similar-ish card. This is another 4 mana convoke draw a card spell, but this one, if you spend 4 mana on it, you will draw 0 cards. But you can spend more mana and actually draw cards, many cards. This card looks prohibitively expensive to cast. Convoke is a very big deal here. It looks like you need an unreasonable number of islands. You don't. Blue can be your secondary color, and you can still cast this reasonably as long as you are properly going wide. This is a card that can easily be too slow for your deck, can easily be not the thing that you're looking for in a number of different ways, but the ceiling is certainly there if you have, cheap creatures and convoke cards and things that make it easy to exchange your cards for your opponent's cards, and then drawing a lot of cards becomes a way to break the game. This this card is delightful, but not for everyone / all decks. But it is good. The ceiling is certainly there. Up next, Protocol Knight. This is another one that is fantastic in some decks, but not for everyone. However, unlike Transcendent Message, this one is more for my opponents than it is for me. I have been destroyed by Protocol Knight a decent number of times. It's really good if you curve out some knights, and then play this and block your opponent's blocker down for multiple turns. But if you are not rich in knights and beatdowns, then this card is not for you. A 4-mana 3/4 that taps something doesn't matter if you don't care about tapping your opponent's creature, and if it only taps it for one turn, it's not even that good if you do care about attacking. This is... You want to be very careful about when you use it, but the Knights aggro deck with a lot of Protocol Knights does do very well. Up next, Astral Wingspan. We are solidly in the sometimes friends portion of the set. I'll say that this is a card that has some real potential if you are good at convoking, turning one of your random useless convoke bodies into a 2/2 or into a 3/3 or 4/4 flyer, and drawing a card is big game. But it is pretty clunky. Even if it's not costing you 5 mana, tapping 5 objects at sorcery speed is a lot. You really don't want to do this into open mana, because if they kill your thing in response and you don't draw the card and you used 5 objects to cast it, it's kind of a disaster. So the card has a home, but it's not for everyone. I would say that this is a card that has fallen some in my estimation over the course of the set. Up next, Corruption of Towashi. This goes in very, very different decks than Astral Wingspan. This is very, very slow, 5 mana to not affect the board at all, but also very, very, very inevitable. If you are good at having things to transform, this can draw you a lot of cards. The fact that you get to it says trigger this only once each turn. Fortunately, the incubator tokens can be transformed at instant speed, meaning that this is actually triggered twice per turn cycle. As long as you can transform something on your turn and something on your opponent's turn, you can draw 2 cards with it each turn cycle. And if your deck is full of things that transform, this thing just draws you into more of them and goes off. I don't think this is very good if you don't have other things that transform. Like a 7 mana 4/4 that draws a card is not a good rate. But if this, if you're good at getting to the state where this is doing stuff, then this is, becomes really good. Obviously, the Corruption of Towashi deck is the same deck as the Omen Hawker deck. Try to play these cards together, and then try to find all of the Eyes of Jin-Gitaxias. Oracle of Tragedy. It's tragedy. This card's win rate's so low. And by so low, I mean totally fine. I don't think the win rate suggests this card is bad or anything. I like it a lot still. The fact that when you draw this early, it lets you draw a card and discard a card to help smooth your draw. Very nice. You don't have to wait until you can get value out of shuffling your graveyard in to productively cast this. Also, when it dies, you still get to trigger it again. If it doesn't die for a long time, maybe you'll be at the point where you want to use the second ability. Otherwise, you can just use the first again. The reason that I like this card, of course, is that I like trying to pair it with cards that let me never deck myself. and play super long control games where I reuse the same removal spells over and over. This is best when paired with black cards so that you get Unseal the Necropolis to loop this with. Also, you need it to die in order to be able to loop it. So if you're trying to draft a deck that's very serious about doing that, be sure to also have sack outlets. Because as a 1/3, if your opponent doesn't want to let you make it die, you will often not have a good way to kill it if you don't have a sack outlet. And then your loop will stop and you'll deck yourself if your deck is really serious about this thing. Sweet card, but historically these kinds of cards perform a lot better for me than for aggregate players. If you are not specifically, if this is not the sort of thing that you have experience with or interest in, feel free to continue ignoring this card. You'll do fine. Zephyr and Shapecraft. This is, target creature has base power and toughness 4/3 until end of turn, draw a card. Obviously, with incubators, this is +4/+3. You should be looking to play this when you have incubators and 1/1 tokens, as opposed to like other creatures, to get a reasonable amount of extra stats out of it. This is a fine combat trick, but not really a priority for me most of the time. Up next, Tidal Terror. 5/6 Island Cycler with when it attacks, you may tap 2 other untapped creatures you control. If you do, Tidal Terror can't be blocked this turn. This card, to me, has more specific applications than the other land cyclers. Specifically, when your deck goes wide and is more controlling and not necessarily great at finishing the game, this is a decent finisher. Also, more importantly, if your deck has battles, this is a very reliable way to transform your battles in the mid to late game. I think that it's worth paying attention to if your deck is a controlling deck with battles that it would otherwise be bad at flipping. I think a lot of the controlling blue decks that go wide would like to have a Tidal Terror or 2 in the deck somewhere. Halo Charged Scab, kind of similar structurally to Tidal Terror. This is a pretty weak card, just played on base rate, that gets better as a one-of in specific kinds of control decks. This one is about trying to establish some kind of engine, like what I explained with C-Double, but it also works with Unseal the Necropolis to get back the Scab and something else with your Unseal, and then every time those things die, you can get them both back again. Also good with Breach the Multiverse. This card is better the more really, really, really good cards you have that it can get back, and also better the more you're playing long games. Not for everyone. If you are like the Knight aggro deck, you want nothing to do with this guy. If you are the green blue X very many permanents deck, you're probably not interested. But there are some spell heavy decks, especially Dimir decks, that are very much in the market for this creature. Up next, Wicked Slumber. 4 mana, Convoke, tap up to 2 target creatures, put a stun counter on either of them, then put a stun counter on either of them. This card can buy you a lot of time, but better than that, it can shut your opponent out for a while. I had some pretty good experiences with this early, where I might have guessed that it would be winning more than this. Not shocked to see it only winning this much, especially as we come to understand this format is a bit on the grindy side. sometimes the game is going to last a lot of turns, and answering your opponent's creatures for a small number of turns won't be enough. This is still a card that you want to play sometimes in your tempo decks, or your decks that have a lot of card advantage and might need to buy some extra time to stabilize. Invasion of Bryn, 4 mana, draw 3, discard a card. So Sift. Sift with upside. This card is not great. Sift is very slow. Some decks are looking for it. They are the decks that, have a good amount of cheap removal mostly. Be careful not to play this in the wrong decks, but if your deck is looking for some card advantage, this is a fine way to get it. Moment of Truth, Anticipate type variant. 1 in a blue, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put 1 of them in your hand, 1 in your graveyard, and 1 on the bottom of your library. This is mostly good if you have Wrath or Sword of whatever and something else. The blue-black sword lets you cast an instant or sorcery with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard for free. There are not very many of them that you can productively cast with that. This is a good way to have something in your graveyard to get to draw a card off of the first trigger of it. Having 1 or 2 of these in your deck actually makes the sword meaningfully better. This is a filler card for the most part. Some decks would, play it. Some of the decks where it, would be good still don't really want it. Let's see. Expedition Lookout. This is precisely what it looks like. A defensive creature for people who are very serious about not trying to attack, but would like to enable their Convoke, and might be playing some of the both players' mill cards and then looking to win someday. This is not going to be a premium 2-drop even in those decks, but if you are trying to block, it is serviceable. Order of the Mirror, very similar stats, lower stats, wants to go in the opposite decks. If you are looking to attack, you're playing Knights Tribal, you maybe have some Protocol Knights. This is not the 2 that you're looking for, but it might be serviceable. Problem here is if you're a Knights aggro deck and you're playing non-premium 2s, you now have an aggro deck that doesn't have the best 2s, and aggro decks are more likely to care about having good 2s. So it's going to speak, it suggests that you're in more trouble than you would be if your control deck has a weak 2. You can also play this if you're generally in the market to transform things, but this card is not very good. Up next, Stasis Field, for people who think that they need removal in their decks. My advice, don't play it. I don't know how much more I have to say about this one. I think that it will be overplayed by people who believe that they have to be able to answer a thing and they don't have a lot of ways to do it. I would suggest that you would be better off simply not trying to answer things and accepting that your deck doesn't do that. Up next, Disturbing Conversion. This is remarkably close to being the exact same card and has the exact same game-in-hand win rates. I prefer Disturbing Conversion slightly because it has flash that can function as a combat trick, and it mills both players, which you might care about. But arguably Stasis Field's better because it removes static text or whatever. The remove all abilities can matter. I wouldn't play either one, so it doesn't matter a lot to me. Amusingly, I guess, Stasis Field has a very slight improvement when drawn. Conversion has very slight negative improvement when drawn. I wouldn't read a lot into that. Up next, Thunderhead Squadron. Never the ideal thing to convoke. 3/4 flyer is just not that great, and it just takes too many objects to do it. It's, just as an exercise for fun, feel free to compare this one to the rare 3/4 flying convoke creature. Yeah. Up next, Oculus Whelp. The most favorable comparison I can offer for Oculus Whelp is Talus Lookout. The Dominaria United 4-mana 3/2 flyer that looks at 2 cards and puts one in your hand when it dies. If you have a transformed permanent, this is pretty similar to that. A little bit easier to cast, but you only draw a card instead of getting selection. Problem is, it's hard to reliably have a transformed permanent, even if your deck does a lot of that. This is not a particularly good or appealing card. Usually not play it. Change the equation. The most notable thing here is the stats strongly suggest that you should not play this main deck. It's the kind of thing that I could see going either way, since a lot of opponents are playing red or green, and it's not dead against other people that can counter cheap stuff. Thing is, countering cheap stuff is not what you're trying to do with counterspells for the most part. Don't play this main, but it can be a decent sideboard card. Same thing can be said for Negate. Furtive Analyst. Hypothetically, it is possible to have decks that are defensive enough that they're in the market for this, like, blocker and looter. In practice, spending 2 mana to loot is really bad. I mentioned that when I was talking about Rona, that this format has very good mana sinks, and you should be able to just get more value out of this, out of your mana than this, even if you're playing a really long game. Complete the circuits. This has, I don't think, ever read to anyone like it was designed for limited. Hypothetically, this could maybe do something cool if you have 1 million creatures and some good spells, but I don't know what. Invasion of Arcavios, cool card, but 7 is a really, 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 really big loyalty number, or defense number, and this much mana to put a card in your hand is not where it's at. Wow, Invasion of Kamigawa. I played with this once early and had some good experiences with it. Like, stunning a creature let me transform it, and then the guy was pretty cool, but apparently it has not aged well. Yeah, looking at the stats, I guess I wouldn't get involved, but yeah. there you have it. I guess what I'll say about battles is, when you're not in a position to use them the way that you're hoping to use them, they have a serious fail state. We saw some of that with, like, Invasion of Gobakon and stuff. And this is one that is quite dangerous to try to do, since you're not guaranteed the front side matters at all. 10 mana Kill Yourself. Oddly, not great stats. I don't recommend playing 10 mana Kill Yourself. The saving grace is that you often won't have 10 mana and you'll fail to get to kill yourself with it. Yeah, don't touch this card. Finally, Emery, Lurker of the Loch, does not have enough enough plays to have stats. I suspect that it has a higher chance of having applications than Jin-Gitaxias Core Augur. I mentioned that it would be cool to see a deck with multiple urns and multiple Hawkers and Emery. Problem is, there are very, very few artifacts that you want to put in your deck, and trying to draft to make Emery work is not a good idea. Yeah, for the most part, Emery should not and will not be played. And that is the end of blue, and if I don't stop soon, it will be the end of my voice. So thanks everyone for hanging out, and I will be back tomorrow for my regular Wednesday stream, which is to say playing some limited and then recording my podcast. I suspect that caution with my voice is going to mean that I don't want to do both a podcast and a portion of a set review. So there will not be more color. I will not be discussing Black tomorrow. I am leaving for MagicCon on Thursday. I haven't worked out my exact plans. I think that I will be leaving late enough that I will be able to stream a little bit first. And so I will try to do the Black set review on Thursday before I leave. The rest of the set review will have to wait until next week. So that's it for me for now. Have a good night. Good whenever you're watching this, if you're watching this on YouTube. And yeah, I'll be back later.